Can you believe it? We're here. It's beautiful. What a lovely Friday. Thank you for joining me on this Friday. If you registered for the program or not, and you just happen to be watching on Facebook Live, thank you for joining us. My name is Lori Bumbaco. I'm an oncology dietitian, and I work here at Cancer Wellness Center to meet with individuals one-on-one to provide nutrition counseling. I also do some wonderful groups, support groups, wellness groups, and then run educational programs. And one of my favorite programs at the center of all time is this one that you're joining in on. It's Ask the Dietitian. And so what we do is every month we pick a topic, we let our participants ask questions, and I prepare a PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen and share a PowerPoint, which goes through a list of those questions, and then also I give my best answers possible. Whenever anyone registers for a program that I offer, we share this content with you. So we always encourage you to register. And then sometimes as an extra incentive to register for programs, there's additional resources like recipes. And so for Ask a Dietitian, I always include recipes because I think that's the fun side of what I get to do when I work with people. So I'm going to share my screen and pull up my PowerPoint. Thank you for being here. And just going to get this all set up. Thank you. Today's topic, when we chose it, it was a few months ago when egg prices were increasingly soaringly high. And now that that's finally started to settle down a little bit, I think you would all agree it never hurts to think about eating on a budget. But I have a lot of great content to share and not a lot of time, so I'm going to get right to it. Okay, thanks again for joining us. So I'm going to list the questions, provide answers, and then offer some resources and recipes today. But first, I thought I would overview some statistics that I came across in preparing this PowerPoint that might be of helpful or useful information for you, or just even just giving you some additional information. I think it's really insightful. So in 2023, we all, like in this country, we all spent $2.6 trillion on food and beverages. It's hard to believe. So prices were, at the grocery store were about 1.2 times higher in 2004 compared to 2003. And that's like right on par for what typically has happened over the years. The average American household spends about $270 weekly on groceries. So you can kind of compare where you can see where you stand. And I'm going to share a little bit more about this in the next slide. We spent more money on eating food outside of our home last year. There was a 12% increase in spending at restaurants or even spending on takeout, which I think is a really interesting statistic. I think if we're looking to save right off the bat, we can probably do that by eating at home more often. So here's a little bit more about that. So this is just a graph they started collecting this data, and this is from the USDA from before 1963. That's like forever ago, right? And this graph here shows a trend over time of what percentage of our disposable personal income was spent on food. And so as you see, there's total food, amount of food, food at home, food away from home, and the trend over time has certainly been a decrease in terms of the amount that we spend from our budget on food at home. And then you see it sort of levels off or increases right in the early, like maybe 2020 around the pandemic. Very interesting little bump there. And then food away from home has over time, of course, as you see, really trended upwards. And then again, it kind of went down in 2020. Now it's starting to trend back up again. Really interesting. So a really important point to make about what we spend, and probably a good point to make that we're going to spend less if we eat more at home. This is another interesting bit of information from the USDA, and this is calorie availability for food spent at home. I'm just going to move this so I can see a little better for myself, as a share of our household spending. So it's just comparing us to some other countries around the world and how much we spend on food at home, and the daily calories per capita. That's the blue line, and then the red line is the red bar is the share of our household spending on food at home. So what's really interesting here is that when a country has a higher income, like the US, the share of our household spending devoted to food purchased for preparing and eating at home is relatively low. So it just helps to put things in perspective. Where if we look at another country like Nigeria, the at-home food spending can reach nearly 60%, which is really quite fascinating to me, right? So if we think about it this way, it just helps put things in perspective for us. And I think I share this only as a way of just helping us understand, what there are things that are in our control. There are things that we can do that are very actionable steps to help ourselves, but just a little bit of extra information that I think is always helpful if we're thinking about how we're doing. Because often we compare ourselves, right? And we think about ways to do better. And that's my job here, is to help you do better. And hopefully today we'll learn ways to do better as well. So, a growing share of our households here in the US are becoming food insecure, and that's defined by someone not being, or sometimes not pay for the food that they need. So, really a timely topic. Research suggests that healthy food is harder to access, it's more expensive and lower quality in rural, remote, or low income, high minority areas compared to metropolitan or high income areas. Interesting, right? I have a public health degree, as you can tell. Some studies report that adherence to a healthy diet is less expensive than current or unhealthy diets. Right now, does that surprise you? It probably would. I'm going to venture to guess it does surprise you. Many people I work with say it costs so much to eat healthy, but actually, some research disputes that. And the public perception that healthy diets are expensive is high, and that itself may be a barrier because you have this assumption, I can't afford that, that's too much. Eating this way is going to cost too much. And that thought is prohibitive, right? So, a little bit of my hope today is to help address that barrier. Now, a majority of us, 62%, say that how much food costs is extremely or very important to us when deciding what to buy. So again, all this information, all reasons why we chose this topic, because hopefully you're here today to learn that maybe I can save a little bit of money and maybe I can improve the nutritional quality of my diet. That's my hope and that's my goal today. So we're going to get right into those questions. We have to start with this one. What's cheap but healthy? I wish I could tell you all the ways that it could be. I could help you out, but I'm going to try my best. So this is just sort of an overview, and I'm going to dive deeper into this with subsequent questions. But planning and saving and savvy shopping make it possible to cook at home and enjoy tasty, nutritious meals. Really, it's planning. Planning is a huge part of that process. It all starts with that, and whatever works for you and your family, and working with a dietitian can help you understand that best, because the same plan isn't going to work for everybody. Intentional shopping can help us to remain in budget, right? So sticking to our list, keeping a list, having a plan, going into that store, it helps avoid the extras that end up in our cart that we really didn't want there in the first place. And also setting up an environment that saves, right? So I'm going to touch on this a little bit today as well. So cooking in a way that organizes our space certainly reduces food waste, because what happens when we waste food? We waste money, right? And also takes advantage of staples that are very important. So staple foods, I would argue, are versatile, nutritious, but also relatively budget friendly. So let's go aisle by aisle, because I hope this will be helpful for you. Now, an important component of eating with a budget in mind is to think about controlling the amount of times that we overdo it, right? Because if we overeat and we're habitually overeating, then we're going to be overspending on all of that extra food that we're overeating, right? And it may also help to minimize food waste when we think about it this way. So I'm bringing this point up because I'm going to also, when I go through each of these things, I'm going to give you an example of, for the average typical person, now this doesn't apply to everybody, about how much we should, according to nutrition guidelines, be eating every day. Again, there's always exceptions, and working with a dietitian can help you understand best what is the appropriate amount for you. So dairy and dairy alternatives, about 2 or 3 servings a day. All right, so what we want to do with our dairy is make sure we keep it safe to eat, right? Food safety does matter, but also too, so that we're not spoiling it. So we want to refrigerate all dairy within 2 hours of getting it, keep it in the main compartment. I know I'm guilty of this. I sometimes put milk in the door. The door is not as cold as the inner compartment of the fridge, and so it's going to warm up that milk. Wrap cheese tightly to prevent mold. If you buy blocks of cheese like I do, which could save on cost, we want to keep it safe to eat, right? And prevent food waste. Now, with fruit, 2 to 4 servings per day, we want to really shop wisely, right? So, if like you are like me, maybe buying some strawberries recently, really inspect that whole package and look for any signs of spoilage. Obviously you're not going to purchase that, right? Because that's waste right off the bat. So really inspect your fruit, and this also works for vegetables as well. But treat them with care. Know how to store them properly so that you don't waste them. And I'm going to provide you a resource at the very end of this presentation so that you can learn how to do that for yourself. Consider freezing fruit that won't be consumed soon enough, and use nearly too ripe, too ripe to eat fruit in smoothies or other recipes. I do this very often with bananas, right? And maybe you do too. As soon as I see it starting to, it's almost like this is way too ripe. I can't consume this. I peel it, I freeze it. I'm going to use it later in a smoothie or another recipe. Next, we'll move on to grains. So the recommendation is to eat a minimum of 3 to 6 ounces of whole grains per day. You can eat all of those whole grains as your 6 ounces, or at least half is a pretty big public health campaign right now. We can actually put a lot of our grains in the freezer, but we want to keep them protected from air. That's what starts to break down and spoil our grains. Learn how to cook our grains and add flavor on our own. So cooking is a part of saving as well. I know there are a lot of like processed grain products where there maybe is like a seasoning packet inside, or it's like a flavored one. You could buy grains in bulk and then learn to add your own spices, because you're adding, again, something that the ingredients that you saved on, you're going to save in the end on the total recipe when you do that. For vegetables, about 3 to 5 servings per day. Just like fruit, we want to inspect them and treat them with care, know how to store them properly. Keep an eye on your veggies. I do this often. If I'm going to the store, I'll do an inventory. What do I have on hand? Oh, I have this zucchini. It looks like I need to use it soon. What recipe can I make with zucchini so that I'm going to use up that zucchini and not waste it, but then also go to the food store to, kind of satisfy what else I need. Consider growing your own. I put a big old smiley face there because that's something I've been considering and contemplating for years. And I recommend it often. I'm guilty. I haven't been doing it yet, but I would love to encourage that. I'd love to support that for you. Some of you may already be doing that, and that's a great way to save. Loose greens are less expensive than bagged versions. I find myself personally, again, often using bagged salads because it's so convenient, right? Now, there is some information bubbling up that some of our food safety concerns happening in this country, that some of those bagged versions are less safe to eat. So actually, loose greens are going to help save us money, and are definitely probably more food safe, because we're going to handle it. No one else is handling it. We're handling it. We're going to be able to wash them and take proper care of them. So that's an option too. Now, again, you get to decide. I'm giving you so many different examples here. You're going to decide for yourself what works best. If you are like, I'm not ready to buy loose greens and prepare them myself, I'm going with the bag salad because that means I'm going to actually eat it, then good for you, right? So I think you want to also understand yourself and know what you are capable of doing in order to do it. Okay. We're going to move on to our proteins, and I talk a little bit more about proteins in another question. So just stay tuned for that. So for most of us, about 5 ounces or an equivalent per day is all we need. Sometimes we do recommend more, and again, that's where working with a dietitian helps. We want to consider plant sources because our animal proteins tend to be the more expensive ones in our food budget, right? So right off the bat, canned and especially dried beans, they are probably the most economical source of protein, right? That we could possibly eat. And I would argue probably the most healthy proteins that we could eat. We want to stretch our protein dollar by mixing, and I love this idea, or combining. So having some, for example, ground beef, ground turkey, ground chicken, and mixing that in with things like beans or zucchini or mushrooms. There's lots of ways to do that, and you sort of stretch out the protein in doing that. Some of you may already be familiar with this, but it adds nutrition when we do that as well, right? And we're probably going to save in the end. I always recommend canned salmon. It's so budget friendly, and it's suitable for some specific recipes, right? So really reconsider that if you're thinking about that. And then I'm a big fan of stocking up and storing. When things go on sale and you have the space for it in your freezer, go for it, right? Because you can stock up. Same thing with the pantry. If you see things on sale, you know you're going to use them, and you know you can store them easily for a month up to 3 months, go for it, right? That's really smart shopping, and that's really great planning. Now, I wanted to share more images, and I think this is a really helpful one. This helps outline, and this is as 2022, so this is the most recent data I could find. This is the cost per cup of some of our vegetables. Now, just a reminder, we're aiming for 3 to 4, maybe up to 5 servings per day of our vegetables. So that means a cup of raw, cooked, frozen, or canned vegetables, or 2 cups of raw leafy greens. So we get to decide here, maybe we're not going to spend on artichokes, or maybe we are, and maybe we actually see them on sale because they happen to be in season now. So we're going to, we're going to splurge and we're going to go for them right now. Or they happen to be, again, in season, so maybe they're a little less money, right? Because seasonality also matters. But this is a nice graphic, and it helps you understand, for our budget, what might make sense for eating more vegetables. Same goes with our fruit, right? It's kind of no surprise here. Like some of these fruits, I understand, like I see them myself and they tend to be more expensive. Again, if you find things on sale, and that's very often how I shop, I'm aiming for about 2 cups of fruit a day. It doesn't matter which ones, right? I think variety matters, but if something is on sale one week versus another week, maybe that's a way to kind of diversify my diet. So this might be some more just helpful information. Fruit tends to be, I think it looks like a little more expensive than some of our vegetables, but you get to kind of pick and choose, and it gives you some options here. So here are some other important ways to save. Prioritize cooking at home. I started this presentation with that over dining out. Meal planning helps us keep to a budget. Shopping in bulk, considering the frozen section for our fruits and vegetables. Shop for seasonal produce and consider a farmer's market, which is now is the time of year, the best time of year. Choose store brands or generic alternatives. I'm going to speak a little bit more about this, specifically how we can save using all of these tips. And certainly coupons and sales help us to save. Portion control ultimately will also help us to avoid overeating. And I'm a big fan of, again, planning. Like if you know you're going to be somewhere for 6 hours and you're like, I'm probably going to get hungry within that 6 hours, rather than having to resort to doing something like takeout or like picking something up at a store, could you pack something, right? You're definitely going to save. And chances are you'll think, because you're planning, you're probably going to pack something that's also nutritious, which makes this dietitian happy. All right, we're going to move on to the next set of questions. These are all sort of similar, so I lumped them together. How to get the most protein in a day on a limited budget. What is the best way to get protein on a budget? Also, what nutritional shakes do you recommend, as they are expensive and they often have too much sugar? I agree. So let's dive deeper into that. So how much protein do we even really need? Let's start there. Sometimes I ask the questions. All right, so it really depends, but basically most of us need a range of about 1.0 to 1.2 grams per kilogram per day. So if someone weighed theoretically 150 pounds, they would require 68, because that's 68 kilograms, up to 81 grams of protein per day. Now, many experts, this is just a side note, many experts suggest that we divide our protein intake throughout the day. Most people I work with and surveys of what Americans eat do not. We don't tend to do this. We tend to divide our protein in our meals later in the day. We don't typically start our day with a good source of protein. So we might want to rethink that. And again, working with a dietitian can help you do that. So let's just say we split the difference here. We need about 75 grams of protein per day. Could we do 25 grams at 3 of our meals? So what does 25 grams look like? I included some plant proteins here. So I have some tempeh, and that's about 3.5 ounces of tempeh. I made some lovely tempeh bacon in one of my programs this week. It was delicious. Some quinoa and beans together. Doesn't take much. And then some turkey meatballs. I put them over some vegetable noodles too. And if you make this for yourself at home, I think it's all really budget friendly, but that's what 25 grams would look like about. So it doesn't take a lot. And that's what I wanted to demonstrate there. Now, here's some examples of affordable protein choices. Again, if you think about what we need, you can sort of do the math here. And if really, I think it's relatively inexpensive. What you'll see is probably the salmon stands out. That's kind of costly. And you might see it cost more, but a 3-ounce serving is going to give us 22 grams. And that's a really good chunk of change for a meal if that's what we're having, right? But beans, you see, is pretty low there, only 33 cents. And I think I used canned beans for that estimate. If you use dry beans, it's going to be even less, which is pretty remarkable. And also I want to point out too, a surprise here, 2 ounces of whole wheat pasta, which is the serving, gives us 8 grams, a whopping 8 grams of protein, right? So there are definitely ways that we can save, but also reach our protein goals. Now, what about shakes? Do we need them? Again, I like to ask the question. Remember, more does not mean better. We simply just need to eat enough for good health. Okay. And again, if you need to tweak those numbers for yourself and you're not really sure, that's what I do. That's my work in clinical practice, but also here at the Cancer Wellness Center. So most Americans consume more than enough protein. Based on surveys, we overeat everything, but we also overeat protein. We just could do a better job at distributing protein throughout the day, according to what surveys suggest. But we're eating enough. So do we need supplements then, right? Do we need to drink a protein shake? I will disclose as a dietitian, supplements are not my first choice for nutrition. Food is my first choice. So I would rather you, in pursuit of good nutrition and in pursuit of adequate protein take, consume your proteins from things like beans and lentils, things like low-fat dairy and eggs, things like fatty fish, and then our lean proteins. Because when you do that, you're also getting other nutrients, really important. And you're probably actually spending less, right? Here's the issue with supplements. They may contain unwanted ingredients, such as added sugars, right? Which we don't necessarily want. Supplements really technically can be contaminated, right? They're not very well regulated. So sometimes in our supplements, and this goes for like vitamins and minerals, but also for our protein supplements, sometimes the way that they're manufactured, other things may sneak into the product that we don't necessarily want there. So it could be things like heavy metals, and it could be other ingredients that we don't necessarily want, right? And that's because they're not very well regulated. So, it's looking to me like what's a better choice here? Protein in food versus protein in supplements. So I'm giving you the go ahead that you don't need to use protein shakes if you're catching my drift. But I will say that there's sometimes exceptions and that supplements may be recommended if for some reason your protein needs are a little bit higher for a certain period of time because of surgery or because of active treatment. If for some reason you're unable to eat enough protein, there might be a reason that certainly can happen. Protein shakes come in handy here. Maybe you just like them and maybe you can afford them. They work for you in your budget. And very often that happens with people I work with too. And then I'll guide them appropriately to find some of the ones that are best options based on their need. Otherwise, you probably do and can eat enough protein in foods, right? I would just encourage that you be intentional about dispersing the protein throughout the day so that you're not eating it all at dinner. Okay. So how do we prioritize protein in whole foods? I would say think about those protein-rich foods in all of your meals. And then even if you're having snacks, because snacks are a great way to get more nutrition, could they be an opportunity for you to get more protein in your diet, right? So chicken, turkey, fish, eggs, low-fat dairy, they're going to give us the greatest protein return on our investment. They are the highest quality, high biological value. They're bioavailable. They have all the amino acids that we need. So those really are the top choices. But when we look towards plant proteins, our legumes like beans, lentils, split peas, they are some of our least expensive protein choices and are just as valuable, nutritionally speaking, right? Especially because they're a great package for other nutrients. Nuts and especially seeds are high in protein, so we can also buy them in bulk. We started to talk about that before we went live with the group here, and that's how you can save some. And I think what also helps is that they can be added to something. So let's say you're having something like beans or lentils, and you're like, wait, I'm not reaching my goal. How do you add a little bit more? Well, nuts and seeds can do that. Like a little bit of hemp seeds on top of something will add that extra protein and really satisfy your requirements. For example, I always like to give examples. So for breakfast, could it be Greek yogurt with some pumpkin seeds and whole grain toast? You're probably going to reach your protein goal there. And again, if you buy Greek yogurt in a small container versus the bulk, you're going to save cost-wise. For lunch, could it be a green salad with some leftover chicken, some roasted beans in place of croutons to add that extra protein and extra fiber and other nutrients? Dinner, a tempeh stir fry, and then some snack options that are high in protein are hard-boiled egg, edamame, handful of nuts. These are not very highly processed, if at all, and they give great nutrition. And when you make them at home, you're going to save. Next question. What are some of the best food choices when living on a fixed income? So I mentioned this before, planning is super important. So planning is one of the most effective and efficient strategies to stick to a food budget. Food waste, otherwise, because if we're not planning, food waste can cost an average of $1,500 per year for a family of 4. That adds up right over time. Make a list and stick to it. So unplanned purchases account for about a 10% increase in our grocery bill. I'm starting to pay more and more attention to that. Because sometimes I go to the store hungry and I'm like, oh, why am I buying this? It's because I'm hungry. I didn't really plan on buying this. Buy in bulk or on sale when possible. And again, that just requires planning. Because if you know you could use something because it's in the freezer and you bought it on sale and it just sits in the freezer and you will use it next week, great. That's the way to save. Generic and store brands are just as nutritious and they are just as high quality. Most people are happy to enjoy them. And estimates are that they are 25% lower in cost. Good to know. Seasonal and frozen produce are also a great way to save. So for example, strawberries are 100% more expensive in December compared to the spring, which is pretty wild, right? And it's probably because of just, again, availability and access, right? It doesn't have to travel so far to get to us. Cook at home as much as you can. I think dining out serves its purpose and it's lovely, and especially this time of year, right? But we certainly know from a nutritional standpoint, but also too from an economical one, that when we cook at home as much as possible, this is just an interesting statistic, people who eat out 6 times or more per week, and that's on everything, not just like dinner, spend $100 more per person compared to those who eat out 0 to 3 times weekly. I think that's a little underestimate according to what I've been noticing personally, but we really can save when we eat more at home. There's no question about that. Also look for options. We tend to find lunches are less expensive than dinner, so that might be an option if that's something that you're thinking of doing for social time, with friends and loved ones. Could you instead have lunch instead of dinner? Next question, what foods do you not need to buy organic in order to save money but still be healthy? I'm really glad someone asked this question. So there's some myths about organic that I wanted to share. So this is one of them. It is necessary to eat organic in order to prevent or cure cancer. That's a myth. It's also a myth that conventional choices cause cancer. If you don't believe me, I have a lot more to share, but today's not the day to do it. So if you want to consult with me, I'd be happy to help you set the record straight on the need to eat organic. You do not need to eat organic. All right. If you can afford it, I encourage that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But there is no evidence at this point in time that conventional foods cause cancer. And research suggests actually that the dose is the poison, right? So if the amount that someone is exposed to is significant enough, there may be a link there. And so that may possibly be where all of this misinformation that we have to eat organic comes from. And I'm going to share with you what that is. So there have been some incidents and data to support this, that factory or agricultural workers who are exposed to very high amounts, higher amounts than we could ever possibly be exposed to in what we eat, that they may have an increased risk for lymphoma. It doesn't mean that anyone who is working with pesticides in the farm or where they're manufactured gets lymphoma. It just seems to be that there's a link there, and that maybe it's that exposure at those very high doses that may be increasing that risk. A study recently in the Journal of Toxicology found that when organic choices were substituted for ones on a certain dirty dozens list, there was no benefit. There was no measurable benefit to those people who ate organic. And they followed, and I can give you the details too at another time if you'd wish. They followed individuals for a long period of time, and they found no measurable benefit by choosing organic. Okay. So here's a little bit more. This is, I love this resource, so it's a good opportunity to share it. This is from the Alliance for Food and Farming, which is a nonprofit organization, and they came into existence in the 80s, 1989, and they represent organic and conventional farmers. They're a nonprofit, and they do not lobby our politicians. They're just here to kind of, again, advocate for farming, but also too for information and education for the public. So they have this really great website, and I'm going to share it at the end. And on the website, they have something called this calculator. And so we can calculate how much of eating a fruit or vegetable would put us at risk for the measurable levels of residues of pesticides that are on it in terms of any potential risk that we are aware of in terms of harm. So I'm going to share an example of blueberries because you might be seeing that blueberries are in season now. According to this calculator, and you could test this out for yourself. You're going to put in your gender, your age. I believe you put in your weight, and it gives you this. It calculates for you the amount of blueberries, but not even just the amount of blueberries. That's because that's not correct. The amount of servings of blueberries that in a day it would take before we had any measurable effect of pesticide residue. That's the highest amount that we want to be achieving, set by the USDA. So hopefully you are, if your jaw's not dropping, like mine is, it would take over 13,000 servings of blueberries in a single day before we even touch the amount of pesticide residue set by the USDA. So that's a lot of blueberries. And I think it's safe to say that the amounts that we're having, we're safe to consume them in conventional forms. And especially because of this bit of information. And what they do, this organization, they like consult. It's not like they do this they're not the experts. They consult with the experts. So they take toxicologists, they take, experts in the field of research about all of this information. And again, they don't really have an agenda. They're just here to give us information. Their agenda really is to support farmers, to be honest, which I can support that. All right, so back to organic. So just did you know that only 1 out of 10 of us are eating the recommended amounts of fruits and vegetables every day? Only 1 in 10. I always say I have job security. So the benefit of eating more and just eating enough will far outweigh any risk of eating organic, and that's what it should say. So if we just ate more, if you're someone who eats 1 serving of fruit, but you're thinking I should probably eat 2 or I should aim for 2, the benefit of eating 2, if it's a conventionally raised fruit, is going to outweigh any potential risk. Every time they do data or research on fruit and vegetable consumption, the good news about eating fruits and vegetables is that it promotes good health. They're cancer fighting foods. Great news, right? The best part about all of that is that it's not organic. They're eating conventional, which is really reassuring, right? So we can reap the benefits of it without eating organic. Now, residues, if they're present at all, and I'll share this, most of the times when they do samples of the flesh and the outer edge of the fruits and vegetables, they really find very low levels, almost so low, almost so undetectable that they can qualify to be organic, which is really reassuring. But all it takes is good old tap water, and you could use it's cold water, and you can use a produce brush if you can, because you're going to scrub what fruits and vegetables you can. That also removes some of the extra residues. So that's proper handling to remove that. Now it is a personal choice. So if you decide I want to buy organic and I can afford it and I can access it, go for it. I support that. I'm not suggesting you not do that, right? But you don't have to have the fear that eating conventional is harmful, because that's just not the case. It's hopefully reassuring, and we know it's probably budget friendly to include fruits and vegetables that are conventionally grown. We also can shop our farmers markets, which are out now. Sometimes they have organically grown options without that USDA organic certification. So if that's something that appeals to you as well, you can find some really great deals at the farmers market. So I encourage that as well. Okay, I believe this is the last question. Which is better, frozen or canned? What a great question this one is. So let's put them head to head. So frozen. Typically, fruits and vegetables that are frozen are harvested at the time of peak ripeness and blanched so that they're frozen. And what happens when we do that? It's like, I like to call it like we're pausing nature's button. So we're putting a pause on that. And that means that it's just frozen in time. There's not a loss there. There's not a loss of nutrition. So we retain more of the nutrients when we're dealt with that way, right? Now with canned fruits and vegetables, they are cooked. When they're put inside that can, they're cooked to a really high temperature in order to reduce the bacterial growth inside that can. So what happens when we cook it at that very, very high temperature? This creates some loss of some nutrients. Not complete loss, but some loss relative to the amount of frozen. It's a lot more. Also, frozen fruits and vegetables, in terms of my homework and my consumption, they typically do not contain extra sodium. Some may contain added sugars, and so you need to read your package labels really well. But for canned versions, they do, right? They tend to have some extra salt and sodium, especially our vegetables, right? And some of our fruit is going to have some added sugar added to it, right? So our best option is to look for the sodium added to it or the sugars added to it and try to look for options that are lower in that, especially if, again, we're trying to stick to budget. But I find that frozen options are just as economical, very close in price comparison. So for that reason, because the frozen tends to contain more nutrients and tends to contain less of the additives like salt and sugar, I gotta pick frozen, right? I think that's the better choice. I think you agree. But now I will say this, at the end of the day, eating any vegetable at all is better than eating none, right? So if you're having some green beans that happen to have some salt in it, that's okay, right? There's trade-offs always. You can reduce salt somewhere else in your diet if it means you'll eat those green beans. So that was my last question. So I'm just going to share some resources that you may enjoy. I included a lot in this month's Ask the Dietitian because I think there's so many to share. And I just was checking the links earlier before, so that's why you see different colors. But Budget Bites is a phenomenal website. I found it very helpful during COVID, like when I was kind of thinking about, well, how do I find some pantry staples? There is a ton of resources on this website, a ton of recipes, and they even break it down by cost. So I think you'll really enjoy that one. Spend Smart is from the Iowa State University Extension, and lots of great information here. What I like about it is it's really personalized. So if you want to learn how to like calculate your food budget, see what it is, where you can make some changes, if you're if you like to, if that's the language you like to use in terms of your budget and where you're spending, and now you want to include this for your food, it's a very helpful. There's a lot of tools and resources on that website. Safe Fruits and Vegetables. That's the one that I just shared with all of those servings of blueberries. So you can go ahead and go on that website and see for yourself when you're eating a fruit or a vegetable, how much would it take? And you're going to be surprised. It takes a lot, like impossible amount to consume before we even come close to getting to those amounts of pesticides that are concerning for us. Food storage guide to prevent food waste. Hopefully you agree this will be a very helpful way for you if you're not sure how to store your fruits and vegetables in ways that are going to help expand or extend their longevity, right? So they're not in the crisper, like perishing, right? So we can learn how to, I think, save that way as well. And then Nutrition on a Budget. This is from the NIH, and they have really a ton of different links and very helpful things that I think you'll find something of use on that website. So I included a few recipes. I'm going to share them with those of you who registered. And I was thinking with protein in mind at different meals, how to save eating a balanced but a higher protein meal choice, including plant protein.